Kempsey, one of the many towns on the mid-north coast of New South Wales struggling in hard times. For 11 months and 3 weeks of the year, no great claim to fame. But for that other week, a population explosion, $1 million boost to an ailing economy, and pride of place for the nation's combatants and followers of a very special motorsport. It takes place on a racing circuit 40 kilometres west of here, a circuit like no other in the land. Drivers, navigators and pit crews from every state in Australia have made the trek to a place called Temagog. The circuit they'll take on covers 470 kilometres, countryside normally the domain of cattle, native animals and silence. Such is the task ahead for many of the crews that winning or filling a place is stored in a minor part of the brain. The challenge here is to finish the race. Macleay Motorsport Promotions has erected a tent city on cow pastures, and 700 volunteers have disappeared into the bush to make sure things go as smoothly as humanly possible. That word unique is about as overworked as an off-road competitor's gearbox, but that's the only word to describe the Bridgestone International. Kempsey's annual weekend of paddock bashing on the grandest scale is brilliantly organised. The race may be fought out in the mulga, but an army of marshals and other officials will see to it that things happen exactly when they're supposed to. Some say that's what stands the Bridgestone International out from the rest. This year, 131 cars will start. There'll be crowd favourites and, of course, race favourites. If there was a bookmaker on course, he'd be knocked off his stand in the rush to back this man. Les Brown of Myrtleford in Victoria has won the past 2 Bridgestone Internationals. Also won the Australian Off-Road Championship 2 years ago. Switched from Goodyear to Bridgestone this year and the one to beat. Another Victorian, Darren Wells, has plenty of support. Won here in 1990, driving for much of the race with a broken bone in his hand. Won the Australian Off-Road Championship in the same year. The big hope for Yokohama. Mark Burrows, also from Victoria, has won all major events except this one in 10 years of off-road racing. National champion in 1988 and leading the Australian Championship going into the Bridgestone International. Terry Rose from Warialda in New South Wales, a great third here last year in a lesser-powered Class 2 buggy. Puts his wife Maureen alongside as navigator, now driving for Goodyear and an obvious threat. And from Port Pirie in South Australia, one of the rising stars of the sport, 26-year-old Hayden Bentley, extremely competitive with a very cool head. A new Porsche power plant will push his buggy through the bush. The 10,000 people who've turned up for a weekend in the dirt will spread themselves around this unbelievable circuit on race day. The day before, they gather around the central arena for a time-honoured round of short course racing. It's the Kings of Kempsey, when the fastest buggies and tin tops, that is, the more conventional and recognisable cars, battle it out to see who gets where on the starting grid for the test of endurance the next day. To warm up the crowd, blokes on spokes in a 2-wheel Temagog shootout. In the first heat of the buggies, Warialda's husband and wife team, Terry and Maureen Rose, put a smile on the faces in the Goodyear camp. The second heat had to be hot. Bridgestone International winner for the past 2 years, Les Brown, up against Darren Wells and a monster of a single-seater piloted by Doug McMillan from Moree. Wells got the jump, and really, that was that. Darren Wells by a country mile from Brown. Heat 3 introduced the so-called tin tops, and Bart Simpson was going along for the ride on a Holden Ute driven by Kempsey's own Peter Briggs. Briggs and Bart got the jump, but were reeled in by a couple of dudes in VWs. Neville Taylor from Strathpine in Queensland and Warren Irons from Vineyard in New South Wales settled down to fight out the heat, Irons taking charge with just a few hundred metres to go. Some monsters rolled out for the next heat, including a Mitsubishi ute containing father and son, Peter and Glenn Hadlow, who live just down the road at West Kempsey. The main challenger was another Mitsubishi, driven by Fabio Zafati. He'd left Sydney's snooty Rose Bay to join the other classes. The Hadlows beat off the Sydney-sider to win the heat, a great result for the locals. While the bike riders again took to Temagog's arena, a computer away from the dust coughed up the times for the buggies and tin tops. Those times put Darren Wells and Terry Rose alongside each other for the buggy shootout. Making up the grid, Les Brown, Doug McMillan and Andrew Zeems from Lockhart in New South Wales. Wells had again cleared out and Terry Rose got left in the dust at dusk as Brown thundered out to catch Wells. But Wells had the Yokohama camp grinning from ear to ear as he pulled away. Brown is a renowned hard charger in the short course events. He and Wells both knew that one small hiccup out in front would cost Wells the lead, but he had sprinted to the front and was determined to stay there, keeping Brown in his dust to win the shootout for the second time in 3 years. Wells had shown the importance of getting out of the blocks like a bullet.
Yeah, this little car of mine's quite light actually, and it springs away very well from the line, and I think if you can get down to that first corner first, it counts, I tell you.
That'd be part of the dust problem, of course.
Yes, well, if you can get out in front and just sort of dust the rest of them in a little bit, well, it's a bit hard to see back there.
The tin top shootout at Temagog was, predictably enough, a battle between the two Mitsubishis. The Hadlows from West Kempsey going blow for blow with Sydney's Fabio Zafati. The crowd alongside Temagog's midfield jumps were looking skyward as the Mitsubishi duel thundered on. The Hadlows had won the first round, but the tearaway from Rose Bay was out to deliver the knockout punch in a car he'd recently sold. He delivered that punch for the new owner, beating the Kempsey father and son by 2 car lengths in a great battle. Zafati had turned the tables, but wasn't all that surprised.
And I had a little bit of a problem in the first heat. I didn't quite get off the line as fast as I normally do, and I think that's why Peter had it quite easy on the first heat.
For those drivers and navigators, a beer, a yarn, a hot shower and an early night, because at dawn the next day, a pre-recorded rendition of Ravelli will trumpet out over the course. That sound heralds the start of the most demanding of all races on the Australian off-road calendar, the Bridgestone International. It's almost 7 a.m, these cars making up the first grid for Bridgestone International 93. It's going to be a long day at the office, 8 hours of mayhem. And a surprise from the word go. Darren Wells, the king of Kempsey because of his great starts the day before, drops behind them, while Doug McMillan of Moree charges to the front. The wave upon wave of crews heading out into a Kubra country are in for a ride they'll never forget. Gullies, rocky creek beds, fast roads, goat tracks and trees, trees and more trees. They'll be tackling the terrors of Temagog in a weird assortment of chariots. The buggies, of course, specially built for this sort of torture, the dying but still competitive breed of VWs known as Bahas, all sorts of utes, a Jeep or two, Jackaroos, Rodeos, a whole paddock full of the Japanese brands, and even a Porsche. After an hour of the great race for 93, the giant ungainly single-seater, driven by Moree's Doug McMillan, had cleared out. Running second at that stage, race favourite Les Brown. 2 great drives put him at short odds this year. The first, 1991. Then again in 1992. Les Brown won those races for Goodyear in Class 2. This year, a switch to Bridgestone and Class 1. The pressure's on, but he's quietly confident.
I think the car's pretty right. I've probably got a little bit of a weak link in the chain, being the gearbox, being powered by a Class 1 motor. But, yeah, I'm prepared to take the risk. I think I'll look after it.
OK, so the first bloke in history to win 3 Bridgestone Internationals, hopefully, and for your sake. How much pressure does that put on you? Any extra?
Well, I thought initially it'd probably put a lot of pressure, but I sort of feel quite OK at the moment, and I don't think it's going to change things much at all.
Brown's main job early in the race was to rein in Doug McMillan. The 49-year-old earth-moving contractor from Moree was shifting the dirt around Temagog like a man possessed. Firestone had entered Australian off-road racing by putting its name on McMillan's single-seater, and things were working out nicely. The car is kicked along by a 3200cc Porsche motor. Getting around like some sort of ironclad grasshopper, the buggy was imported from the United States. It reportedly cost McMillan $80,000. In Doug McMillan's dust, Les Brown, Brett Osborne for Goodyear, Glenn Owen, Terry Rose and Darren Wells, now starting to claw his way closer after a poor start. A bit more pressure for Wells this year. His navigator for the past 13 years unavailable. A new boy alongside and a trifle green.
Wixman, new navigator for this race, and as we took off, he had both hands over his eyes like that.
Darren, just how important to you is a navigator? I mean, one bloke for 13 years, it's obviously like having a right arm, is it?
Oh, yeah, for sure, because there's a lot of things that a navigator does that really I take for granted, and I've now noticed that when I put my hand out for a rag to wipe the goggles, he's wondering what I'm doing, and normal gauge looking and things like that, oil pressure readings and water temperature, turning fans on and off, and I've had to educate him all through this morning, actually.
For a rough idea of just a section of the Temagog track, we went for a ride with rising young South Australian star Hayden Bentley.
Coming up to this corner ready to go through the trees, she gets pretty twitchy, it's blooming rough. You've got to judge your braking right, or she gets pretty tight in here, can get out of control through these ditches. Through here you can absolutely roar. This little bit's a bit tight. In second gear still through here, probably 7,000 revs. Ready to come out into the open here and power slide around this corner, probably 7,500 revs in second gear. Just coming off that big jump into this tight left-hander here, you keep it in tight, it's the best line you can have. As long as you don't drift out too wide, because it chews up a hell of a lot. And really sink the boot into it, coming up to this hill, ready to head down through the creek. Gets a bit rough here too, keep it in tight. Keep it in tight, it's a lot better. Just drop off of here as quick as we can and boot it in first to get to that creek flat out. Here's where your navigator gets wet. My side's the dry one.
No visibility hassles there, but apart from all the obstacles laid out before the drivers in this race, dust was quickly becoming the #1 problem. It's not much fun roaring up behind a slower car on a fast corner and suddenly running out of vision, but that's what was happening all around the circuit. Accidents at speed are part and parcel of an event like this, perhaps none more spectacular than Keith Owers a couple of years ago when he went for a spin in the Yokohama buggy. And plenty of concern last year after a buggy left the track and slammed into a tree, trapping the navigator Ken Houston. He's back this year behind the wheel.
Well, we're trying to put a good prologue time in, and we misread the track. We went out on reconnaissance earlier in the day and it rained since, and we come at the tree a bit too quick, locked it up, went sideways, and all I saw for about 50 metres was this tree coming straight at me, and that was about it. As you saw on the tape, I was in there for quite a while, but yeah, I come out of it pretty good.
So you recovered all right, and now you're going to drive for the first time at a Bridgestone International. Do you feel nervous about that since the accident?
Oh, very much so. It's the most nervous I've ever been this morning before I went out for the prologue. But once the clutch dropped, the nerves were gone and back into it.
And as Doug McMillan and Les Brown continued their tussle in the Bridgestone International for '93, the drama continued. One crew scrambled to safety when their car burst into flames, trees stopped others in their tracks, and the dust just got thicker. Dramas of a different kind, though, for young gun Hayden Bentley.
That spare CV, where is it?
Impressive performances in other races had put Bentley under the wing of Goodyear. but a snapped rear axle had all but ended his run at the title. The sign rider from Port Pirie joined a long, long list of casualties. Well into the second lap, there just seemed to be no way of getting closer to Doug McMillan's monster from Moree. Les Brown had actually dropped back in second spot, a victim of the dust. The only time Brown actually grabbed the lead was when McMillan made an early pit stop for fuel on the third lap. That made the order Brown, Glenn Owen, McMillan, Terry Rose, Darren Wells and Neville Boys using all his off-road experience to move into contention. The race for outright victory was as tough as ever, but perhaps even more so in the various classes. The new Firestone team included Kevin Lee from Sherwood in New South Wales, at this stage leading Class 3 and 12th outright. An interesting runner in Class 3, Tari's Christine Souter, not yet 21 and having a drive in a Bridgestone International.
The men give me a bit of flack, but, you know, it's pretty good. They're all pretty supportive, and they're always there to help, like my dad. Dad's always there to help me.
You've been navigating for your dad and now stepping out of that seat into the driver's seat. What sort of a change is that for you?
Oh, well, it is a bit of a change. I'm really happy with the run that I just did. I wasn't going to tackle that big jump, but I did, and I think I did it pretty well.
Well into the Bridgestone International, and for the front runners, a time for a quick break from the dust, the trees and the kangaroos. The leading crews were hoping this would be their one and only pit stop about halfway through the race. With leader Doug McMillan having been in earlier than expected, the others chasing him had no time to spare. Off-road pit stops are obviously nowhere near as speedy as, say, the lightning brakes in Formula 1, but the principle's the same. Get that car fueled up, new tyres and back into battle. The big difference here is you've got to settle the dust as well.
Setting up the drink, Darren? All right for a drink?
Yeah, I've had one, thanks.
Yep. Make way. Tighten the nuts up. Yeah, we go.
Take a little bit, Eddie.
Yeah, please put on the brake.
Good enough brake, Wall?
In the toolbox, in the big toolbox in the bottom, mate.
This, the toughest one-day race in Australian motorsport, is vitally important for the tyre companies that throw the dollars in. Bridgestone's motorsport manager, Mike Brett, has controlled crews on the World Formula 1 circus.
This is totally different, yes. This is really much more fun. The Formula 1 and the World Sports Car thing is very, very serious, and with major sponsors involved like they are these days, of course, everyone's under tremendous pressure. Here it's a little bit more relaxed, although there is still a very, very strong competitive spirit, of course.
I was going to mention that. How important is it for Bridgestone to do well in a race like Kempsey?
Well, I think this is a showcase for our normal off-the-road tyre, which the average property owner and the featherbed farmer would purchase. This really and truthfully proves the product in a very, very serious way.
Doug McMillan's cause out in front was made just that bit easier when main challenger Les Brown pulled into the Bridgestone pit with problems. Brown saw the dream of 3 straight Bridgestone Internationals evaporating with every minute spent on replacing shock absorbers. He'd also opened up a crack in the chassis. It was going to be someone else's year for a change. In French, parc fermé. In English, hard parking. In short, a regrouping of the leaders with just 2 35-kilometre short laps to run to decide the winner of the Bridgestone International for 93. Doug McMillan is an incredible 15 minutes ahead of the rest. The rest include Terry Rose, Darren Wells and the Class 1 buggy of Jamie Robinson from Melton in Victoria. These then are the cars that will fight out the placings this year. McMillan at unbackable odds. The rest in a dogfight for the minor prize money. Classic, it again produced the drama, the near tragedies, the hard luck stories and the triumphs that have attracted interest from around Australia and overseas. When Doug McMillan's American import first set a tyre on Temagog, there was a bit of backhanded scoffing. The feeling among those in the know was that it may be all right for the shorter races in the United States, but not here, not Kempsey. But the likes of Rose and Wells already knew the title was out of their reach. McMillan, with no navigator to help out over 470 kilometres, emerged out of the dusty gloom to grab the glory for Firestone. Terry and Maureen Rose from Warrielda second, Darren Wells third. An 8-hour solo drive flat out unearthed the new champion in a car that's got many people thinking. For Doug McMillan, it's priceless. If I wanted to buy it off you, how much would it cost me?
Oh, you probably wouldn't be able to buy it just now.
To give you an idea just how tough this race is, 130 cars started, just 28 finished the distance. Kempsey's Bridgestone International is much more than just a motor race. It's a blend of mateship, courage and an ever-present urge to overcome the odds. The crews that didn't taste champagne this year are already planning a return to Temagog.